Now, the pandemic has created a reality check for direct-to-consumer brands as well. And really, it's forced them to reconsider everything. Around the time of the Great Recession, a new business launched out of the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. It was called Warby Parker. And the rest, as they say, is direct-to-consumer history. The company pioneered a unique model that offered value pricing on eyeglasses that would normally cost as much as double or triple elsewhere, employing modern branding and digital infrastructure to make the business work. Let's call this the beginning of the DTC 1.0 revolution. Soon, however, this formula was replicated for all sorts of new categories, with scores of new companies valued in the billions of dollars, from away luggage to Hims hair loss, from Harry's razors to Glossier beauty. Well, a decade later, another revolution is now afoot. The pandemic has been a reality check for direct-to-consumer brands, many of whom were spending a fortune in acquisition costs and burning through cash. These incumbents were also unprepared for the Generation Z mindset, which values purpose-driven companies that go beyond these DTC 1.0 formulas. It's now time for the first section of our two-part talk on a new playbook for direct-to-consumer brands. And I'd like to introduce two advisors who worked closely with the founders of Warby Parker when the business model and branding strategy were still forming. Since those early days, both of these speakers have gone on to work with scores of DTC brands in mapping out their strategies. Here are Anthony Sperduti, Executive Creative Director, Partner, and Co-founder of Mythology, and David Bell, co-founder of Idea Farm Ventures and a former professor at the Wharton School, to talk about overhauling the DTC playbook.
It's interesting for me, looking at what's been going on with DTC brands even before the pandemic. It struck me that a lot of the new brands being launched just were struggling finding relevance. Both you and I worked on Warby Parker in the early days and continue to do. And I really look at them as the first and foremost direct-to-consumer brand. And a lot of the things they did, a lot of the attributes to their brand became what I see as the playbook that's being a bit overused at the moment. Having a founder story that was really the everyman founder story, right? Like having Neil and Dave and Jeff and Andy talk about their pain points with eyewear and being really, really peer-to-peer about it. One set of millennials to another set of millennials. Selling that brand and that product, and people really, fell in love with that.
And there was the Warby Parker school bus, kind of the iconic bus that traveled around the country. There were the stores and showrooms, and then eventually now sort of full-blown retail. So I think that's one thing as we kind of jump forward into what's happening now, that the offline world is actually super relevant, and the ways that you engage with your customers sort of viscerally and in real life experiences becomes really critical to the brand.
Having that as part of the narrative and part of the story also became part of that, what I would call Gen 1 DTC playbook. I think the first wave has run its course, and it's the factors of 2020 are really going to accelerate the evolution that's really been necessary to keep the brands that are talking directly to consumers relevant. And especially now as Gen Z starts to have more purchasing power and is starting to come of age.
Ubiquity becomes noticeable to consumers. So, consumers, the idea of the just noticeable difference kind of disappears. And so that actually gets into the mindset of the customer. There's a cognitive trigger that goes off, and you kind of realize that everything around you almost looks the same. And you also realize secondarily that the sameness not only is sort of perpetual, but the sameness is cutting across all the different products that you're encountering as a consumer, whether it's your shoes, whether it's your toothbrush, whether it's the t-shirt that you're wearing, whether it's the products that you're putting in your refrigerator. And so on that sort of psychological, almost subliminal level, that realization starts to kick in. And then because of that, when something new comes along, because it's not differentiated, it just kind of merges into that great, I think, as you said earlier, sea of sameness.
For the fun of it, my studio and I put together very quickly a fake brand. So Vowel is a new brand that we created in a matter of hours that sits in the middle of wellness, pet, and CBD, probably the three biggest trends in brands right now, millennial brands. We started with the name Vowel. We dropped the vowel out of Vowel. We then put it into a typeface that is a little retro and a little editorial looking. we cocked the O to make it just a tiny bit more quirky. We then, of course, added millennial pink because every millennial brand needs a good tonal color. The imagery shot was one on a cyc with a bright color. We added some nice design elements to make it Pinterest ready. And of course, the image, really isn't successful unless it has a succulent in it. No millennial image is good without one of the succulents. The headline we wrote, the strap line, soothing dogs who bark, one organic CBD lozenge at a time. And our brand here has a social mission. For every lozenge we sell, another one is given to a dog in need, because of course every dog needs a CBD lozenge. And then lastly, to make the brand just a little bit more human and a little bit more cute, we added a set of illustrations to show that we're not a corporation, but we're really created by people. And this brand was done in a matter of 2 hours in between other projects. That's how replicatable the Millennial Playbook really is. Our studio knew that this brand really fit the playbook. We all could easily imagine it on the L train coming out of Williamsburg. And for better or worse, we knew that was a benchmark for a Gen 1 DTC brand. But also, Gen Z is now starting to become a force in culture. The economy, again, is uncertain and very uneven in a lot of different communities. And the social unrest that happened in the States over the summer, really was a reckoning for a lot of brands and a lot of corporations, but also that new crop of founders now. And so when you bring all of that together, for me, it really feels like it's an accelerant to this evolution where the next generation is going to start crafting these brands, and the brand's attributes are going to start mirroring what is really important to that next generation. And I feel like with all of these things happening all at once, it's really going to speed up. And a lot of, it's interesting, a lot of quotes that I've been reading from some of the new Gen Z founders, one I, heard directly from the founder of Parade was that the first generation of direct-to-consumer brands just is not relevant to her generation.
Yeah, we actually have a much more complex confluence of factors, which involves a lot of social reckoning, social unrest, and sort of rethinking our role in society with each other and sort of our role in relationship to the planet. I'd say those are the two defining things that have happened this time around that are sort of, in some sense, a bit more chaotic and a bit more shambolic than what we saw last time. And as a result, what's coming out of the evolving playbook brings those two things much more front and forward.
I think one of the first things that we're going to see that is going to be pretty prevalent is this idea of shattering of norms, of really being overt and overturning some long-held principles. And I think a brand that has a really strong example of that is the underwear brand Parade. The co-founder, I read a quote from the co-founder, Cami, where she wanted to really rethink and have culture rethink what sexiness is. And obviously it's a perfect category for her to have that conversation. And the way she put it, she wants her brand and the sexiness that it represents to be quote unquote full spectrum with real true diversity in a way that I think few brands have ever really shown. And I think it's incredibly admirable and really exciting how she's taking that on.
It's, I think, a great point, Anthony. And the second element of this new playbook that's really exciting, particularly in today's world, is focusing on transparency, fact, and science, as something that's really coming to the forefront as part of the counterpoints of these new brands in the playbook. And a brand that I really love there that's a recent launch is a brand called DIUX. D-I-U-X is a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek nod by Charlotte, the founder. She's French. It's a sort of religion. The brands, the products that are coming out are deliverance and communion and so on. And what she's really doing is elevating the notion of skincare through science. So she's literally herself now becoming an esthetician. In addition to doing that, actually looking at medical journal research, what's really good for you, what's really good for the planet, what works for your skin. And that's really a category where there's been a tremendous amount of obfuscation. And even if you look back to some of the previous generation of brands, really built on sort of narrative and story almost to the detriment of what is the true science behind the product, both for yourself and also for the environment.
Traditionally, brands and companies would be a little agnostic with any issue that might be divisive. And I think going forward, I think consumers, especially the younger generation, are not going to want their brands to be neutral. They're going to want them to pick a side. They're going to want them to stand up for them. And they're going to vote with their dollars, right? And so this idea of being activists or remaking the world, I think, is going to be something that we might see the most of coming out of 2020. One of the brands that I look towards that I think is doing this in a really lovely way is a brand called Bread. It's a hair care brand founded by Maeve Haim, and she has just done a really incredible job of putting her central premise that Black women haven't been seen by the beauty industry the way that Black women want to be seen and represented, first and foremost at the core of her brand. Of course, the product itself is environmentally friendly. It's vegan, it's cruelty free, but her big unlock, I think the reason why it's going to be so successful is that she is letting that audience be represented in the way that they feel like they haven't been represented in the past.
As we look forward, what's really exciting is you see the new generation is not only taking advantage of the enabling factors, everything from the iPhone to all of the things to build the website and the brand that you need, but I think with much more passion around not only the audience that they're speaking to, who may have been a marginalized or underserved audience in the past, but secondarily, in terms of the creative process of really getting involved with making the product from a science-based point of view and a factual point of view. So I think those two things give me a lot of comfort. They create a lot of excitement in me for the founders that I'll be working with in the years to come. And, the playbook will continue to evolve. Maybe in 10 years, you and I will be having this conversation again, looking back at success and looking forward to the next generation.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. I think it's incredibly exciting thinking about this next generation starting to create their own brands, where it is going to be really reflective of consumers. The wildly diverse set of new founders coming up on the scene, I think, is just going to make this next generation of brands incredibly exciting, incredibly powerful, and to your point, really needed. The world has never needed more positive force as it does now, and I think companies and brands are now really starting to take that role, and I feel like this generation coming up is going to take that pretty seriously and is going to really imbue their brands with that spirit. So I think it's pretty exciting.
I'm sure we'll be collaborating and thinking and working through these new brands together as well.
Yeah, so fun to see you, David. Thanks for the time.